Well, hello there, chums. As I, Captain Stephen Exo, and yes, we have a news video for you. Yes, we haven't done one of these for a little while, no. Anyway, so this news is more about upcoming things on my channel and things that are going on in the No Man's Sky community and verse. And yeah, and then we've got a little bit of speculation towards the end, so be sure to hang about for that. Right, so Exo, if you wouldn't mind uploading the video segments that I've put together, that'd be fine and dandy of you. Executamundo! Hellplays has changed his name to Jippers. If you head on over to his page over on Twitter, you can actually vote for the location and date of the next No Man's Sky meetup. Please vote for Guildford, please, because you're near the studio. There's a good chance that some of the developers might actually walk in, and if we've got anything we want to deliver there, it's just around the corner, and it makes for great photo opportunities. And I took some awesome photos, made some great videos, met some great people, won some awesome prizes, and I'm hoping to take along these cards that I'm making to this show, chums, and I'm hoping to give some of these decks away and also play some games with these cards with my chums at the meetup. So if you are a chum of mine and you're able to come, that'd be fantastic. Or you can tune into our Friday night Nexus live show that myself and PT are hosting at 8 PM GMT every single Friday. And yet there's a Discord link. You can call in, you can ask whatever questions you wish, and it's going to bring all the latest news from the verse. And my channel is a great place for that. But also, I've also got Cyberpunk coming to my channel, hopefully soon, chums. Beyond Blue, Beyond Good and Evil 2, should it ever arrive. Iron Man, and maybe even PS5 content once next gen gets here. But yeah, if you want to help support my channel through live chat or ad revenues or whatever, that's all going towards my PS5. Now, Mr. Cryptic, Mr. Sean Murray himself, has been putting out some bits and bobs that hints at the journey continues in 2020, and also some neat stuff is going to be coming in 2020. So yeah, there's those two little bits of nuggety information right there. And yeah, so next up is the speculation sort of coming out of that. So myself and PT were contacted by an informant that says that they used to go to college with the people from Hello Games or from the gaming communities where the people at Hello Games have worked, basically people that know them and are in the know about what they're up to. And he spoke to about 4 or 5 of these individuals separately, and they've all been coming back with the same name of an update. Curious! And that name is Generations. So yeah, rumour has it, chums, that it could be Generations as the next update. Now, if you throw that into Google, No Man's Sky Generations, it comes back with a video. That video is GDC 2017, where one of Hello Games' devs is actually talking about some of the coding that they've done in C++. But yeah, I'll put the full video link on a card right now on this screen. But here is the dev from Hello Games talking more about level of detail testing first off.
Those get, even low resolutions, those get pretty expensive, and we can't cover a whole one of our large planets with even our lowest LOD of voxel data, so we also have a much cheaper low voxel LOD that exists per planet. We have a high, that Octree, that exists one for the whole solar system, and we just swap it between the planets, transfer, cancel creating regions as we need to, as we move around, but we also create, just as you fly into the system, these low-density voxel spheres. They're just 2 voxels high, so there's really very little data there at all. They're pretty cheap. And we just generate 6 separate polygonized cube faces that map onto our sphere. And that gives us those planets in a much cheaper way from any point in the system all of the time. Okay, so next, I'm going to talk through our generation pipeline, so how we fill in that voxel data, what we do with it once we've got a whole load of voxels and we need to render it and turn it into a game we play. So here are our stages that we go through. So we have our voxel region, and we want to take that through to something that's playable. We go through the following stages. So first we generate it. That's filling in the voxel data from noise until we have our completed density data for that region. We polygonize it, so we have a vertex mesh. We then spherify it. So we've done those 2 stages just as a voxel cube, and we then spherify that vertex data so that it will fit on our sphere planet. We then construct a physics mesh. We construct like a nav mesh for creatures, and then we finish off by covering that region in plants and creatures, buildings, gameplay props, anything that we need to make it playable.
So that was the list, but next up, it's about level of detail draw and rendering.
In here. So this GIF is pretty much real time, run on my laptop before, and I think it's LOD LOD 2, so maybe the second furthest away LOD from the player. So you can see we're dealing with a lot of regions. Each one of those little squares is a region that we're creating, and you can see it filling in real time. So when it goes again, you'll see each of those regions flipping really quickly through a number of colors, and that's them going through their generation, polygonization, all of those stages. The way that we order those is based really highly on visuals. There's no real driving factor aside from what the player experiences and what they see. So when those regions are going black, that's them being filled in by a nearer LOD. So we're able to fill in this low LOD real quick, and then we start to bring in more detailed terrain over the top, because that's the most beneficial to our player. We generate using a point-based system. So the stuff in front of us, if we go now, generates first, and then the stuff around about us spreading out from the camera.
Next up is Curious, because he talks a little bit about placement from the sun and seed in the universe placement.
So it helps here, when we're going to talk about generation, to have a bit of an understanding of how we look at generation in No Man's Sky in general. So we see generation as this top-down approach always. You're always feeding data through one generator, coming out with some more data, feeding that into the next generator, and just doing that continuously until you end up with what you want. So in the case of terrain, we're starting by knowing which solar system we're in, and we know that by a positional seed. We feed that through and generate some info about the solar system, how close the planets are to the sun, what kind of sky it has, what the atmosphere is like. And then we can feed that data through to each planet along with the planet's position-based seed, generate some information about whether it should be rocky or cliffy I don't think is a word, but it has cliffs, you know.
Currently they have pre-made props or assets, but he mentions a model generator in this next clip.
So with that in mind, when it came to writing this particular generator, the generator that would output our terrain, which is, you know, one of a number of generators along with our texture generator, our model generator, they're all just independent things that are taking data as input and then outputting something that we can use in the game or something we can use in another generator.
Now we all know that flowing rivers are not a thing, but yet in this next clip he shows rivers.
So to break that down to how we actually do it, let's start with 2D terrain generation. So our first stage, as an optimization more than anything else, but also because it simplifies things conceptually, is to block out some shapes in 2D. So we'll split areas into mountains, into maybe some smoother plains down there. There's a river on there. And this doesn't come out as voxel data. This is just a series of values that are saying the extent to which this voxel is a mountain or is smooth or is a river. So it's a much larger amount of data, but we're only retaining it for a short period of time until we go on to 3D generation. And that's what gets us, for example, the hills in this image. But the thing we do with our voxel data is we don't just polygonize it once, we polygonize it through different polygonizers to get different sets of data. So looking at the cubes in this image, we also do a cube-based polygonizer to get these nice terrain resource indicators. And that's more similar to the way in which something like Minecraft polygonizes. So it tends to be vertex heavy, but it's quite cheap. So we're just considering any point, considering the faces around it. We consider if there's a sign difference. So if you have a dense region with a non-dense one next to it, so we have a mountain with air next to it, then we just create a flat plane there, and we can build up that cube data fairly easily. But like I said, it's quite vertex intensive, so we only do that in near LODs, whereas we'll generate the actual terrain as far out as you can see.
Next up is decorating the planet with foliage and creatures, and this is one of my favorite parts.
And the first step in that is placing a bunch of objects. And again, that can end up to be quite a significant cost. It's something that we do in compute shaders on PS4. And the basic approach is really similar to the noise that we're using for generating the terrain. So this is kind of a top-down view. So hopefully you can see the kind of green bits are grass, and there are some rocks and plants in there. And you can kind of picture quite quickly that that might have come from some simplex noise, something like that. And we're just placing objects with a cutoff at the highest points, and we're also applying an additional layer of noise that just cuts down on the density to kind of really quickly give us control over the spacing that we want. The driving factors here are artistic, and this is something that Kate Compton talked about before, that if you ask an artist, then if you have a tree, that's kind of nice. You can have a tree on a terrain. if you have a tree with a small rock next to it or a small bush, that's much nicer. And if you can work all the way down in scale recursively, continuously, the more stuff you add, the nicer it kind of gets. So let's have a tree with some bushes, with some small plants, with some pebbles at the bottom, and we start to build up our terrain in a nice way. So this noise-based technique is our way of doing that. We additionally use an offset grid, and that's just similar to the terrain-based technique that I was talking about before, so that we can place gameplay objects when we really need control over how far apart those are. So we just split our terrain into grid cells and choose how many of those should be active. So stepping through, we also place our object separately on our terrain across the LODs, so we can place much larger objects on our lower LOD terrain. So here's LOD 2. LOD 1, we're starting to add in some bushes and things. And LOD 1, we have our full set of objects, and we have our grass that's only appearing up close where that LOD comes in. And that presents a problem because we're placing our trees, for example, on that lower LOD of terrain, but we're replacing that whole terrain with something higher detailed as you get closer. So we need to reposition them onto the surface, and we do it something like this. So there you can see them fading between imposters to real models and also readjusting to the surface. So it's kind of cheesy that they interpolate like that, but it's far better than popping into position. And generally, it tends to be much further off from the camera. This is me flying really quickly in flycam to an area. And it's just slightly more subtle than them just popping.
We also get to see a quick glimpse of an old trading post, and the ship's faced the other way, which makes total sense.
This is dumb. Okay. So now, quickly, I'll go through actually simulating on this world that we've just generated and covered in plants and physics and things. The first thing to talk about is our creature routines. They're one of the things that vary most based on how our terrain is generated. And not knowing where they can go is a significant thing. So as you can see in this GIF, we generate these paths for them to follow, but we don't actually add the creatures till you get in really close to them. So we know ahead of time where there potentially will be a creature, where that creature is going to be, and whether the camera is going to reach that point, but we don't bring it in until there's actually an intersection.
Okay, well, if you cast your mind back to that list of the several things that make up Generation, I am really hoping that if we do get an update called Generation, it contains a lot of improvement to what we're seeing currently. I mean, some of the things that he's mentioned and shown in this video right now, I don't think we actually do have in the actual iteration. I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, but this is from 2017. Perhaps they planned this stuff, but it hasn't quite made it in as yet. But now he does a nice little roundup, and he says something interesting about the hardware. And if the hardware improves, so could the engine.
All right. And finally, I want to talk about evaluation and evaluating our content and our worlds and evaluation of procedural content in general. So I've spoken about different things on No Man's Sky a bunch of times, and I kind of like to finish on the importance of this because it's really meaningful to us. It's meaningful to the artists when they're generating content that they don't just see their content in context. They don't just create a model and look at it in the game. They see vast quantities, all the assets that come from that model. And that's true for our planets as well. We need to not just create a planet and look at one of them. We need to be able to really quickly go through loads of planets and say, why are all my planets red? It's valid that one planet would be red, but there's clearly a bug going on there that's caused all of them to look like this. Or there's this whole space that we haven't explored in terms of generation, and we could maybe look into that in future. That's a really big one for the artists to go back to especially, but it's true for us looking at generation techniques for terrain and things as well. But it's also an important thing for performance that we're not just looking at one planet, that we're looking at a vast quantity and that we're looking at it regularly. So this is Simon's smoke test tool, which is really fundamental to us while we're working on the game. So we can see performance degradation and things over time. Every time we run a build, then we see all these screenshots, we get these captures, and we know how we're doing in terms of performance. And it's important that we're doing that on the same planets because we're generating loads of different planets, and some of them will be way more performant than others. Some will be filled with foliage and life and will be really pushing us, and some will be really cheap and they're not a problem at all. So we need a way of keeping track of that throughout the project. And I think if you're doing any generation stuff at all, focusing on these tools is a really significant thing to do. And finally, we can create generative worlds, and we can create them in real time as the game is running. And we can do that today, again, on current hardware. If we can do that and ship a game as our tiny team, there are so many more options for people with more resources out there. I think it's a really valid avenue for us to be pursuing as game developers. I think is hugely exciting. All right, so thank you all again for coming today. If you want to ask me questions, I'm going to head over to one of the wrap-up rooms, but also feel free to shout me online. And standard plug for my company. I love it very much. You should come work with me. It's great, and thanks again.
Okay, chums, well, that's all we have for you on this episode, chums. But yeah, until next time, you guys have been frickin' excellent. And yeah, if you've got anything you wish to add, please put it into the comments. Always awesome to read your comments, people out there. And yeah, I will see you next time. Cheerio for now. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And yes, I have a Patreon. If you wish to support my channel in that way, there is a tier there for pretty much everyone, including ship models. And here are the Patreons that are supporting me in that way. Thanking you, and here are my other supporters. And again, thanking you, Patreons. I also have merch. You can grab yourself a mug, a t-shirt, some fancy socks, or a lovely hoodie, heading over to Teespring. Or yeah, you can hit like, subscribe, or just don't skip my adverts. That throws revenue down my avenue. Thank you very much for watching, and please consider clicking one of these links.